Hi everyone, welcome back. And here we are again, working with the Canon 90D camera. And in today's lesson, we're going to take a look at how to work with the menu system of this camera and how to select the best options to help you get better stills and better video. Let's get started. Now, even though we are working with the Canon 90D camera, many of the things that we'll show you in this menu system will be very similar to the menu systems of other DSLR cameras in the Canon family. And so if you're still working with the 70D and the 80D, a lot of the things that we show you will also work with them. There are some advanced features with the Canon 90D, and that's the reason why we chose this camera to do our series, because it really is a big step up from even the 80D. If you have the 80D and you're wondering, is it worth the upgrade? Well, absolutely. There's so many advancements that have been put into the 90D that it is really worth the upgrade. You can probably sell the 80D very easily. It's a very popular camera. And put that money towards the 90D body. You're going to love it. It's just so many advances. All right, so let's get started. Of course, the first thing that you have to do is open the viewfinder in order to see the menu options. Let's just put it down here so that we can see everything clearly on our other camera here. In order to see your menu options, what you have to do is hit the little menu button here. What you see in the menu options is going to be dependent on other factors. Because the camera is great for not only taking photographs, but also for taking videos, you have to switch between the two. When you're taking photographs, for example, and it's this little button right here, I'll turn that maybe just a little bit so you can see it better. If you want to take photographs, you have to make sure that this button is switched to the little white camera. And now the camera is ready to take photographs. But the other thing that it does, when it's switched to the camera, rather than the red video camera that you see symbolized there. Now, when you press the menu button, you are going to get different options. If we were to scroll through here, we would see that there are a lot of options now that are specific to taking photographs that won't show up if you've got it set to taking video. So if you are wanting to, for example, switch the camera to take 4K video, and you're scrolling through all the menu options and you just can't find where to set it to 4K, well, it's probably because the camera is set to the camera settings rather than the video settings. So keep that in mind. The menu options are going to be different depending on what you have this set to. And it actually makes a difference too what you have your mode wheel set to here as to what is going to show up. So just be aware of the fact that things can change depending on other factors, other settings that you have the camera. So let's take a look first of all at some of the menu options for taking photographs. Let's make sure it's set to the white camera. Press our menu option here. Actually, before we start doing that, we should just take a moment and show you the different ways that you can navigate through the menu system. With the Canon cameras, the most recent ones, of course, it's a touch screen, right? So all you have to do is just point and actually touch the screen to actually switch and select options. That's great. But some people find, and me too, find that my fingers are just a little bit too fat, and I can actually navigate faster using some of the controls that are on the camera. And if you've taken the time to look over the back of the camera and the top of the camera, you've probably noticed that there's a lot of wheels and dials and buttons on this camera. And a lot of these wheels and buttons that are here will actually help you navigate through the menu options. So here I'm turning the wheel at the top of the camera, And as we turn it back and forth, we can move around the menu. There's another wheel at the back of the camera. If we turn it, we notice that the options go up and down, whereas the top go back and forth. However, that's not the only way you can move around. You'll notice there's a little joystick here that will also help you navigate. If you press at 3 o'clock, it's going to move across. If you press at 9 o'clock, it's going to go back. And 6 o'clock, it's going to go down. And 12 o'clock, it goes up. So that's another way that you can navigate. You can also navigate with the info button. But of course, there are times when it is just faster to use your finger, and I still do as well. For example, when I want to format the card, I just usually find it's easier to point to the little wrench there, hit the format option, and hit OK. Very quickly, I've been able to format my card. One more thing that we should point out on this camera when working with the menu option is that you'll notice that or at least with many of the items here, you can go deeper into the menu, but it may not be obvious right at the start how you do that. Let's say we want to go into image quality, and in fact, that's one of the first things that we'll do. You'll notice that there's a little set button right here in this back wheel, right in the center of this back wheel. And if you click on that, you see that you then go deeper into that particular menu item. And so now with our wheel, we can make selections here, whether we want raw or not. And then once you have selected the menu item the way that you like it, hit the set button again in order to confirm that that is what you wanted. And let's maybe just go into that again and choose it. Let's go back to raw, set the set button again. And then we notice that the menu has changed. We're now taking raw and large JPEGs. Now, of course, the other way that you can do this is still just using your finger. Let's go into image quality, just using our finger, make our selection, and then you'll see that there's a set button right at the bottom of the screen. And so rather than using your set button on the center of this wheel, you can actually just point to and touch the screen, and you've made your selection that way. But you do have to do one of those two things. You have to confirm the selection that you made. A lot of times when people are first working with this menu system in the Canon cameras, is that they'll go ahead, they'll make a selection. Let's maybe just try it here for an example. Let's say we go in and change our image quality for our still shots. And this time we want to just have raw photos taken and no JPEGs. So we'll select the little dash. And then what people will do, will hit the menu button and think that their selection has been accepted. But we'll notice, as we look at the screen, we see that it's still shooting raw and large JPEGs. So what happened? We made our selection and it didn't seem to take it. Well, here's what happened. We went into image quality, we made our selection, but didn't confirm that that was the selection that we wanted by hitting either the set symbol down there, the OK button, or using this. This is what confirms your selection. So if you just hit the menu, nothing has really changed. So you do have to confirm the selections that you make by hitting the set button. Okay, well, I think with that, we are ready to go in and make a few changes to the menu system. The first thing that we do want to go into is the camera settings, have it on the white, and on the image quality, which is actually conveniently the very first option that you can select. If you'll notice on the screen, there's really 2 or 3 levels of menu. The top screen is the main level where you can go to different options. Let's go back to the first one. And then also under the camera option, there are many other secondary levels that you could select. So there's a lot to go into, which is the reason we can't spend the time to go through every single option in this lesson. But I just want to share some of the main things. So let's go back to the camera, and let's select the very first option, and you should have a screen that looks like this with image quality at the top. And that's the one that we want to go into. Right now, it is selected to shoot RAW stills, RAW photos, as well as JPEGs. And let's go in. When I go out on a shoot, I don't worry about having JPEGs. And so I have this shut off on my cameras. And so all I'm getting when I take a photograph is a RAW image. And I like that because it doesn't take up as much room on my card, and it can save to the card a little faster because it's not having to have a RAW image plus a sidecar JPEG. It doesn't have to take the time to process that JPEG image and write it to the card as well. So it's a little faster to work with when you don't have the JPEG turned on. However, I find that a lot of people who are just getting into photography, just working with this kind of camera for the first time, if it's only set to RAW here, when they put their card into their laptop and save all of the data from the card, their laptop may not necessarily show the thumbnails of those RAW images. It may be that the RAW image has to be processed with other software before they can see it. And they might not even have that software on their laptop. Like Photoshop or Lightroom, Bridge, some of those high-end software programs that may be the only way to view the photographs that you've taken, other than looking at them at the back of the screen of the camera. But when you're wanting to have the other people in the office take a look at what you shot, they might not be able to see them if you've got it set just to RAW. So that's up to you. It doesn't take that much more processing time to have the JPEG turned on, and so you may want to select JPEG as well. And you might as well have the large JPEG, the largest size. You can select different sizes of JPEG to include as a sidecar to your RAW image, but you might as well go ahead and have the large one. That way, if you need to use the JPEG right away for a print piece or send it off to your designer, then they'll get the highest quality JPEG that the camera has been able to produce. But whether you are ready to use RAW images now or not, I really highly recommend that you do have RAW images selected. You know, the Canon camera does give you the option to only shoot in JPEGs. You know, if you select the dash there, it will only shoot JPEGs. However, I highly recommend against that. Even if you are not ready to yet work with RAW images, if you're out there taking photographs, you might as well be saving RAW images for that day when you or your designer or your other people in your office want to be able to have the ability to work with the images that you've shot in a much more professional way. They will have the option of having your RAW image. And so that's important. And so for most people just getting started, the setting that I would recommend here is to have the RAW and the largest JPEG selected. And let's just hit the set button to confirm that. And we can confirm it also in the image on the screen where it says RAW plus large JPEG. Well, what are some of the other menu items that might be important for photography, getting good photos? And I'm kind of getting the sense that this lesson is running a little long, so maybe what we'll do is split this up so that we'll just concentrate on getting the camera ready for taking good stills in this lesson, and then we'll do one more lesson where we just concentrate on the video settings. Let's scroll down here and notice some of these options. This second one down gives you the option of choosing the frame that you want your photos to be in, the aspect ratio. And by default, it comes 3:2, which is the actual size of the screen itself. So when you have it selected to 3:2, the photos that you take are going to actually fill the screen. However, there may be the odd time when you would want to change this. 4:3 aspect ratio is not really used that much these days. It was the aspect ratio of old TV monitors. And so if you knew that all of the photographs that you're going to be taking will be used in an edit that is 4:3, SD video, then just for convenience sake, you might select that, but it's kind of outdated these days. The aspect ratio of most TV monitors today is 16:9. And so if you knew that all of the stills that you were going to be taking were actually going to be used in a video edited in HD or the 16:9 aspect ratio, you might want to select that. And that will save the editor a little bit of time in resizing or reframing your photographs. They'll just pop right into a 16:9 edit. And then the last one, 1:1. This is square, right? 1:1. And I'm guessing that's for Instagram people. Is Instagram still all square? So I suppose if you are an Instagram photographer and that's your preferred format, aspect ratio is a square photograph, you might want to set it there. But I recommend just keeping it on 3:2. The 3:2 is going to capture the most pixels. And in the end, if you want to crop it to 16:9, of course you can in Photoshop or other image editing software. So you can do all of these, the square, the 16:9, the 4:3 frame if you want to later. But having it at 3:2 is going to give you the most pixels to start with and let your editor decide how they want to use the photograph, how they want to frame it. All right, so we'll leave that at 3:2. Image review. Right now I have it on hold. Now the whole idea here is to try and save battery life. What this refers to is after you take a photograph, the image comes to the screen for you to take a look at and make sure that you got what you wanted. If you have it set at 2 seconds, it's only going to stay on that screen for 2 seconds. And it might be enough time for you to take a look at it and decide that that's what you want. And so if you're the only one out in the field, maybe 2 seconds is long enough. But if you're wanting to show it to your client who's maybe out in the field with you, or show it to the people you just took a photograph of, having it at 2 seconds means that by the time you turn it around and show it to them, it's gone. They're going to say, oh, it's blank. And so you want to have it longer. And sometimes even 8 seconds isn't long enough for you to come over to the people that you just took a photograph of to show it to them. And so you might want to have it on hold. That way it doesn't go off until you hit the button the next time. Hit the shutter release button. The reason why some people don't like to have it on hold is they'll take a photograph and they'll show it to the person, and then they'll get talking to the people and they set their camera down and maybe walk away and leave it all like that for an hour or so, and they come back. The photo is still at the back of the screen, and it's been eating battery life for that whole hour. Release shutter without a card. What this is referring to is if you don't have an SD card in your camera, it's not going to allow you to take a photograph if it's set to off. If you have that turned on, it will allow you to take a photograph, click the button, and actually see the photograph on the screen, but it's not saving it anywhere. And for people who are brand new to a camera like this, if it's set to on, they might be out there taking lots of beautiful photographs, and they'll bring it back to you and say, can you send me a copy of all those? And you take a look and realize that, well, none of the photographs that they took actually were saved anywhere. And so if you have it set to off, it won't even let the person take a photograph. They'll never see the photograph on the screen. It'll never give them that feeling as though the photograph has been taken. So I would suggest you leave that to off, especially if your camera is going to be used by multiple people. You're passing it around to different people in the office. It's good to have that little fail-safe there so that people can't take a photograph unless there is a formatted card in the slot. All right, lens aberration correction. If we were to go into that, we would see that right now the camera body, the computer inside this camera body is actually communicating with the kit lens and making appropriate adjustments for this lens. If you were to take this off and put on another Canon lens, it will show up here and let you know that it's communicating with that too. And you can choose whether or not you want to use more lens aberration correction than what the computer does by itself here. All right, but we can just leave that as is. And let's move on. Flash control, we weren't worried about that. So we see that as we continue to turn the wheel, when it gets to the bottom there, it's just going to move on to the next sub-menu, item number 2 there. And let's maybe take a look at ISO speed settings. I believe the factory settings on the Canon 90D allows for a much higher ISO range. Unfortunately, what happens is that once you go beyond say 6400 ISO, then the grain becomes quite noticeable. And what can happen is the computer inside the camera doesn't always make the best assessment and will compensate too heavily on ISO settings, which will end up giving you more grain than what you would probably like. And so I like to go in and set these to a lower ISO as a maximum. Then that way the computer inside the body of the camera is not going to go crazy on you and have you end up back at the office with a bunch of shots that are too grainy to use. 3200 or 6400 ISO, then you'll be safe from that. And if in some given situation you're just not able to actually take a photograph or shoot video because you're running up against this ISO barrier here, then the computer will let you know that you have to do something in this lighting situation to compensate for that. You might have to put on a different lens that has allows more light into the camera. Let's take a look at white balance. By default, it's set to AWB, which stands for auto white balance. And these Canon cameras actually do a pretty good job of assessing the color temperature of your environment and automatically adjusting to it so that your images don't look too orange or too blue, but fairly accurately demonstrate the actual colors that were there in the environment that you shot in. However, there are times when even the amazing computer inside this camera can get tricked. And so it's good to know about how you can work with the white balance setting of the camera. Let's just maybe go into this, take a look and see what our options are. If you are in a completely sunny day environment, rather than use the auto white balance, you could try using the daylight setting. Some of the others here, you're in the shadows, you're on a cloudy day, you're inside using tungsten light. In some buildings, you might be in fluorescent light. And if you were doing flash photography, you could try working with that. Or there is an option to actually do a custom white balance. And that's something that we should probably do a separate lesson on to show you how to do a custom white balance. And the last option, it's just a K there, stands for the Kelvin temperature. This allows you to actually go in and dial in a particular temperature for the environment where you'll be shooting. So if you knew, for example, that you're going to be working with other photographers that might be filming, and you want to make sure that all of your temperatures are going to align, then everybody can set their temperature to the same Kelvin setting. If you're going to be in a studio situation, you probably set this to something like 3200 Kelvin, and you might want to set all 3 or 4 cameras that are going to be used in the studio to the same Kelvin setting, and that'll make it easier for your video editor in the end. But for the most part, I just want to assure you that just leaving it on the auto white balance is going to be fine for most situations, especially for those that are just starting out filming with the DSLR cameras. Don't worry too much about setting a manual white balance at this point. Later down the road, we'll talk more about how you can do that. For now, auto white balance is fine, especially if you're shooting raw stills, because you know that when it comes time to process the images, we can work with the color temperature after the fact if you're shooting raw images. Okay, let's move on, see what else we might want to share here. All right, you'll notice that when you come to the end of one sub-menu and you keep turning the wheel, that you'll actually go on to the next main level of your menu options. And then as you start scrolling across, you're going to continue to move across the subheading of that main menu. And you'll notice that there's a lot of options here. And if you're not seeing all the same options on your menu screen, remember that depending on where you have your mode wheel set will determine how many menu options you'll see as you start working with the menu. Make sure if you have, like, for example, if you just have it on auto, the little green square with the A, your menu options are going to be rather slim, few and far between. So if you want to see all the menu options that we're working with, make sure that your mode dial is, say, set to M for manual. A nice exercise that you can do when you have some extra time is to take the manual, the instruction manual for your camera, and go through every menu option here with your manual, and it has very clear instructions on what each one of these menu options will do, and that will help you become a better photographer, being able to work with all of these settings. But just to get you started, that's what we're doing today. This is all about Wi-Fi and how you can connect your camera to a local Wi-Fi router that will allow you to either upload images to the internet or to another device on the same network. Let's maybe save this to another lesson down the road. This is going to be a more advanced level lesson that we'll spend some time with, but we want to cover the basics first. File numbering. It's good to have this on continuous. If you have it set to auto reset, what will happen is every time you plug in and format another card, the number system is going to be reset to 0. And that makes it very tedious when you are trying to keep some type of organization to your shots, or you're bringing shots into the same folder on your computer. You're going to end up with a lot of shots that have the same file name, and you don't want that. That can cause problems. So to have it set to continuous is a lot better. Canon will still reset the numbering system, but every 10,000 shots it will go back to 0. And after the 10,000 shot, you should be into another folder on your computer. We hope anyway. Auto rotate, yes, we want auto rotate on. And it's good to remember that this is where you need to go to format your card. The little wrench symbol, usually I'll just turn on the menu, point to the wrench, hit the format card, and be ready to very quickly format my card. All right, here's some good ones to take note of. The auto power off. You may have noticed that when you first got the camera and you turned it on and you maybe got distracted or something, after 30 seconds it shuts off. And you might find that a little frustrating. It's always shutting off on you. Here's where you can go in and change that. Right now I have it set to disabled so that we can get through these lessons without it always shutting off. But normally I might have this set to, say, 4 minutes. And that way, if I do put the camera away or on the shelf or in my camera bag without remembering to shut the camera off, that it'll automatically shut off after 4 minutes, and I'm not going to waste my battery. Display brightness. Now this is talking about your view screen here. Sometimes when you're out on a sunny day, it's a little bit difficult to see what's happening on the screen, and this allows you to adjust the screen a little bit. If you happen to be filming an event or a wedding and you're inside and it's dark where you're working, you might be able to turn that down a little bit. Date time zone. This is a good thing to have set properly, and it's one of the first things I do whenever I get a new camera body is to go in and make sure that the date, time, and zone are set properly. And if I am moving to a new time zone, to make sure that I change it before I start my shoot. I might be, say, going to Myanmar for 3 weeks on a shoot, and I want to make sure that all of the photographs and video that I film imprint the proper date and time right into the metadata of the video or the still shot. And it's good to have that as a reference, or if you're working with a group of people on a shoot, to have the editor be working with files that are all set to the same time and date. It's very helpful to have that accurate. Okay, video system. We'll talk more about that in our next lesson when we deal with video settings, touch control. Let's see what else we got here. Headphone volume, beep. If you're finding the beep that this camera, the little signals that it sends out to you, annoying to the people around you, or you're in church, for example, and you don't want your camera beeping, well, here's where you can shut it off. I usually have this disabled on my cameras. All right, well, I believe that does it for the menu settings that I wanted to point out to you for taking great still shots with the 90D camera. In our next lesson, we'll talk about the menu option settings that I believe are important for getting good video. For now, I just want to say farewell, and if you found this lesson helpful, by all means subscribe so that you can get notified for our next lessons, and we'll hope to see you down the road.